On the 5th of March 1936, the Spitfire prototype K5054 made its first ever flight from the Supermarine works at Eastleigh in southern England, heralding the start of a legend that is just as powerful today as it was during those dark years of World War II. Fuck me! Fuck me! Fuck me!
There is a story that's been told in aviation circles and pub bars for decades. Just after the Normandy landings in 1944, RAF pilots flying Supermarine Spitfires supposedly carried beer from England to thirsty British troops in France. The idea is irresistible. Fighter planes delivering beer across the English Channel, but did it really happen? Or is it just one of those stories that grows better every time it's told in a pub?
Okay, fantastic.
You have control.
I have control.
Today on FlightPub, we're investigating the legend of the Spitfire beer run. On June the 6th, 1944, Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history, the Normandy landings, better known as D-Day. Within days, the Allies had secured a foothold in northern France, but the early days of the invasion were chaotic. Supply lines were stretched, temporary airstrips were carved out of French fields, and thousands of soldiers suddenly found themselves cut off from many comforts of home, including one very British necessity: beer. The story goes something like this. RAF pilots flying Spitfire fighters from England to Normandy realised something important. Their aircraft often carried drop tanks, external fuel tanks mounted under the wings to extend their range. Once those tanks were empty, they were often discarded, but someone had an idea. Instead of fuel, why not fill the tanks with beer? So the ground crews modified and steam-cleaned spare drop tanks, filled them with beer, and fighter pilots flew them across the Channel to supply British troops. A fighter-delivered pint. But could this actually work? A typical Spitfire drop tank could carry around 30 to 90 gallons, which is several hundred pints of beer, but there were problems. First, the tanks weren't designed for food or drink, they were fuel containers. Residual petrol fumes would taint the beer. Second, the tanks weren't pressurised or insulated. Temperature changes and turbulence would have affected the beer badly. And finally, there's the small matter of taste. Beer stored in a former petrol tank probably wouldn't win many camera awards. So what do historians say? Sadly, there's no official RAF documentation confirming regular beer deliveries by Spitfire. However, there is evidence to suggest the story is true. Apparently, the first beer run took place on the 13th of June 1944, just a week after D-Day. Flight Lieutenant Lloyd Berryman of 412 Squadron was given the mission. His wing commander, Keith Hudson, instructed him to take two other pilots, load up their Spitfire tanks with beer and fly to a makeshift airstrip near Bonneuil-sur-Mer in Normandy. Berryman's mission sparked a wave of beer deliveries as word of the beer run spread. More pilots got involved, and on July the 12th, 1944, the first official shipment of beer arrived in Normandy, but it was a limited supply, only enough for each shoulder to have 1 pint. With demand far outpacing supply, the RAF found new and ingenious ways to transport larger quantities. More squadrons joined in, with Hawker Typhoon pilots doubling the delivery capacity. However, a metallic taste from the fuel tanks was a downside. But the RAF found a solution. They simply started strapping beer barrels directly to the wings. The RAF's ingenious solution to bring a piece of home to the front lines was sadly short-lived. The irony of the situation was that the operation was halted not by enemy action, but by the long arm of bureaucracy. The tax office, always a buzzkill, threatened to fine breweries for exporting beer without paying tax. And just like that, the era of beer bombing was over. So, did Spitfires deliver beer after the Normandy landings? Almost certainly, yes they did. And it's a story that, like many aviation tales, gets better with every retelling, especially in pubs. And that raises a question. If you had a Spitfire with a spare drop tank, how many pints could you actually deliver? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoy aviation stories with a pint on the side, please subscribe to FlightPub.